Alton nodded and rose from his seat. "We'll catch you two later. Have fun," Genevieve said. Finn caught Inga's eye as she stood, and then he gave her a broad knowing smirk. "Cheeky little." Alton's fingers pressed into her back and she stiffened in surprise. She launched into a quick walk, easily leaving him behind. She thought she heard Finn choke on a laugh as the crowd swallowed them up. "Are you okay?" Alton asked at her side as soon as the snackages table came into view. The table was piled high with trays of baked goods, including mini pies, both fruit and meat, the nut, berry and chocolate concoction that the groom referred to as trail mix, shortbread with jelly centers, Ben the baker's famous sweet rolls, and brownies dusted with powdered sugar topped with a single raspberry. Inga tried to shake off the memory of his fingers pressing into her spine. "Yeah, I'm all right." She grabbed a plate and loaded a few snacks onto it, and he followed suit. They lapsed into a comfortable silence, the kind that didn't require words. And yet she couldn't help but think that her friends or maybe even her family were watching and whispering about them behind her back. But was that so bad? They were best friends and, well, he had declared his crush on her all those months ago. It had been so long ago and he'd been gone so much of that time, she'd nearly forgotten all about it. When he inevitably returned every few months, however, his words would return to her without preamble. Back then it had been so uncomfortable, so painfully awkward. It had taken her a long time to get over Finn, to not feel a pang of jealousy as Genevieve would take his hand. It didn't help that they were so disgustingly in love and made their public displays of affection easily known to all. Finn claimed that they did it to ward off all his adoring fans, but he did everything boldly, without shame or a care in the world. Even now as Inga turned from the snack table she saw them through the crowd. Genevieve had foregone her chair and slid into Finn's lap, her arms wrapped loosely around his shoulders as they talked, his hands around her waist. What must it feel like to be that confident with the one you loved? Even better, what did it feel like to have someone in your life with whom you shared those feelings? Inga couldn't see herself ever being that confident or bold with anyone, let alone in public. Or maybe she could, someday. If things were different. "Inga?" Alton asked. "Let's sit outside," Inga said promptly and turned toward the doors. "It's hot in here." Alton followed her without argument. They squeezed through the crowded doors and breathed in the fresh evening air. Inga enjoyed about 3 seconds of silence before she realized there were more than a few couples standing among the pillars, some of them caught up in tight embraces. "Oh, for the love of the gods!" Inga huffed and stalked down the stairs. "Where are you going?" Inga didn't reply. She kept descending until they were a healthy distance away from the numerous making-out couples. She took a seat on the stairs and set her plate on her lap. Alton looked amused as he sat beside her. "So? Don't say it." Inga lifted a finger into his face. "Don't even mention it." Grinning, Alton lifted his hands. "Okay. I'll shove this brownie into your face, Brand. I have no doubts you will." "Okay, then stop grinning." "I can't," Alton said. "You get so awkward with public displays of affection. It's adorable." Inga faltered. "Adorable." Alton seemed to realize his word choice and was torn between taking it back or rolling with it. The pause was brief before he said, "You heard me. It was cute. I'm not afraid to admit it." Inga wasn't sure what to say to this, so she stuffed a raspberry shortbread into her mouth. "People are just so gushy." "They are," Alton agreed. "But not everyone is like Helga or Finn. Some people are quieter in their affection. Like Eric and Adriana." "Right." They lapsed into silence as they ate their snacks, watching the clouds move across the starlit sky. It was rather peaceful with the cool night breeze and the ocean hissing across the banks below. Laughter and warm auburn light flickered into the night from the great hall, but otherwise it was calm. When their plates were empty, Alton stacked them and set them aside. He leaned back on his elbows and gazed upward. The moonlight made his freckles stand out sharper against his skin. "See that one?" Alton asked quietly. Inga looked up. It took her a minute to realize he was referring to the brightest star in the sky, winking among its brethren. "Yeah. That's the North Star. She's the one we follow to bring us home." She's lovely, Inga said, turning to give him a smile. She found him not looking at the star, but looking at her instead. Alton smiled softly. She is. Inga was suddenly thrown back to that day in the belly of Johann's ship, someday to be his ship, when they'd apologized for hurting each other and saying things that didn't need to be said. And yet they'd both hinted at something potential. He'd started to speak and then thought better of it, choosing to keep whatever thoughts locked inside. And Inga, she'd decided that she wanted to be his friend, but she wasn't proud enough to say that it could never happen with him. That maybe someday they couldn't be something more. She didn't know the future, and she still didn't. In some ways she felt like the same girl as she'd been that day. But looking at him now, she realized something. That deep down, somewhere in her soul, that said she didn't need boys and she preferred Alton as her best friend and her best friend only, there was something else to it. Something that pulsed when he was around. Something that ached when he was gone. I don't want you to leave, Inga whispered. Alton's brow furrowed and he sat up. I'm not leaving for a few weeks. I know, I just. Inga fiddled with the material of her dress. For that first year or two that you traveled, it was different. Maybe because we were still kids in a way. Sure, I missed you, but it doesn't feel the same as it does now. I'm happy for you, that you don't have to be trapped here, that you can go off and have adventures, that you have a future. That you can be free and happy. But a part of me still burns inside because I want to be selfish. Because I don't want you to leave. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. And I think I've been avoiding that fact because I didn't want to make it worse. I don't want to let you go. The words were pouring out of her, more words than she'd realized were pent up after months of thinking it and ignoring it. And yet a weight seemed to lift off her chest now that they'd been spoken. All she felt was relief. His fingers, calloused from handling rope and carrying boxes and tying sails, were gentle as they turned her face toward his. Then don't. Don't let me go, not when I can take you with me. Inga jolted. Go with you. I can't go with you. Not physically. In here. Alton tapped his chest over his heart. We could write to each other. We use Terramail as part of the business. We may not see each other much while I'm gone, but that doesn't mean that we can't still communicate. Wanting to have me around, that's not selfish, Inga. You can be happy for someone's success and be sad to see them go, but it's not selfish to miss them. Feeling somehow warm and tingly, Inga smiled. I'd like that. Writing letters, I mean. I miss you too, you know. Alton said. It's great, living on the seas, traveling. I love every part of it. But it's also lonely and quiet, even with Johann. I think that's why he gets so jabbery when we make port, because he hasn't spoken in hours, sometimes days. I can't imagine doing it by myself for decades. That does sound very lonely, Inga said. Yeah. But knowing that I have Burke to come back to makes it worth it. Well, yeah, you were born and raised here. Your family is here. Inga snorted. Plus if Tarin ends up getting preggers, then you'll have to come home to see your new nieces and nephews. Alton huffed a laugh. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. They got married today. Well, I'll keep you posted in my letters if there are any announcements. I appreciate it. But I wasn't just talking about Burke or my family. Alton said. I was talking about you. Inga blinked in surprise. Do you remember what I said to you a few years ago? Which part? The part where I made a horrible mistake and told you I like you after, well, everything that happened. Ah, that night. Inga said with a wince. A horribly embarrassing night. Alton blinked and then paused. An increasingly large pause. Inga froze. Oh wait, I meant. Not what you said. I mean yes, it had been embarrassing at the time, but I meant looking back on that day, the whole ordeal of me fighting with Finn and getting myself in a tizzy, which caused that stupid episode, and then you found me on the floor, and then when everyone tried to get an explanation I treated you like a jerk, and later on I again treated you like a jerk. All of that is embarrassing to look back on because I was dumb and immature, and I know I don't have to focus on that aspect of it anymore because you forgave me, but that's the difference between being a kid and growing up. You always look back on your biggest mistakes with embarrassment. I wasn't saying that you were an embarrassment for saying you like me. A slow smile had stretched across Alton's face. Thank you for clearing that up. Ah, you're welcome. Inga said, slightly breathless. So you might say that I do remember, yes. I never stopped liking you. I tried to, this past year, because I knew you wanted to be friends and I wanted to respect that. But dating options aren't exactly that plentiful on the open seas and I just kept coming back to you. Inga swallowed, slightly breathless. What are you saying? I'm saying it, Long said. That while long distance is difficult, I think we could do it if you wanted to try. We're supposed to return by August. We could give it a try with the letters and see how it goes, and if either of us decides that it's not working, that's okay. But only if you want to and you're sure. I'm not. I'm not trying to force anything on you at all. No, I know you're not. Inga said. You're not that kind of guy. She bit her lip and looked away. So many thoughts and feelings were running through her mind. She hardly knew what to say or where to start. What are you thinking? I'm thinking how strange it is that we're actually talking about long-distance dating. Inga said, then froze. As if saying the words aloud made it real. A flash of glee spread across his face. I love it when you do that. What? Surprise yourself. You thrive off of being blunt and direct, and yet sometimes you don't seem to realize something until you say it out loud. Huh. I didn't realize that was a thing I did. All the time. It's one of the many things I like about you. Inga gave him a sideways glance. Now he was pursing his lips, as if internally kicking himself. She suddenly grinned in amusement. What? Alton demanded. Nothing. You just try so hard to be your absolute best, and yet when you loosen your collar a little bit, you speak your mind. Alton gave a hum of agreement. I guess we could both do with a little less thinking and a little more bluntness. Less thinking, more bluntness. She glanced at him sideways, thinking. She shed the layers of overt out of the last few years and considered him. Was he kind? Yes. Did he know and understand her? More than most, yes. Did he have goals and a future? Yes. Did they have similar interests? Yes. Did her family like him? Of course, they'd known each other for years. Was there anything holding her back except stubbornness and fear? Inga searched her mind. Bluntly. Decisively. She came up empty. No, there was nothing. No reason why she shouldn't take a chance. She still didn't know what the future held, and maybe their paths would divert someday. But maybe they wouldn't. Maybe taking a chance wasn't a bad thing. And though her heart thundered, Inga simply said, "Kiss me." Alton's face whipped toward hers, utter shock on his face. What? Decision made, Inga nodded. You heard me. You said we could do with a little less overthinking and more bluntness, so here it is. I like you, Alton Brand, and I don't know what I'm doing or where this might lead. But I like you too, and I have no reason to not trust us, at least until August, to see how it goes. So if we're going to do this, we're going to do it properly. So, kiss me. Alton looked torn between a mixture of shock, amusement and fear. I forgot how scary your decisiveness can be. Hey, you started all this. This is all your. Gently, Alton cupped her chin with his fingers and brought his lips to hers. Inga froze, hardly daring to breathe. It was strange and different than anything she'd ever felt before. His lips were soft and gentle with a little bit of pressure, and distantly she felt his fingertips slid across her jaw to rest behind her ear. Her eyes had fluttered shut at some point. Maybe it was instinct, but suddenly she was kissing him back. She heard and felt him sigh, as if in relief. As if he couldn't believe this was actually happening. It was over all too soon. It could have been moments or hours, though the logical side of Inga's brain was sure it had only been seconds. Her breath was tight in her chest as Alton pulled away, only millimeters from her face. The brown of his eyes had flecks of gold, something she'd never noticed before now. Never been so close or looked so closely to notice. She rubbed her lips together and his eyes flicked toward them. For a moment she thought he'd kiss her again, but he didn't. Instead he smiled gently and brushed a dark lock of hair behind her ear. It was so gentle, it was perhaps more sweet than the kiss. Distantly she realized her hands had curved around his arms. They felt quite nice actually. She shook her head and cleared her throat. Well, as far as first kisses go, it'll do. Alton snorted into laughter. You really have no tact. True, but then again I didn't know what to expect. Inga said, slowly retracting her hands. I'm sure you've got more experience. Actually, no. Inga looked up in surprise. What? That was my first kiss, too. Yeah. Alton gave her a small, shy smile. I wanted to wait. For what? Someone special. Despite herself, despite every part of her stubborn Jorgensen body that resisted, Inga smiled and looked away. She didn't know what this strange new feeling was in her chest, like a terrible terror was flapping wildly, trying to escape. But it was a nice feeling. A good feeling. And that's my favorite smile on you. In case you were wondering. Inga rolled her eyes. You have a favorite smile of mine. Really? Alton shrugged. I've had years to pay attention. I'm only just getting started. Inga said, her brows raised. Well, at least we can learn something together. What? All my favorite things about you. Well, I am pretty spectacular, Alton choked. Inga grabbed him by the shirt and he went quiet when she pulled him closer. But I meant this. Alton had no arguments. As she set her lips on his, it seemed for once they were in agreement. A loud clanging sound rose over the din of the great hall, effectively silencing jovial laughter and conversation. Hiccup turned alongside his fellow Burkians and friends from Jet who'd come for the wedding and blinked at the sight of Genevieve Sullivan standing atop a nearby table, a metal pot and wooden spoon in hand. She was grinning brightly. Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention please? Finn was staring up at her in bemusement. His eyes flicked to her feet, likely to make sure she wouldn't topple off. He needn't have worried though. She was sturdy on her feet as she lowered the pot and spoon, and waited for the great hall to go quiet. Thank you very much, Genevieve said, turning in place so those behind could see her as well. It may sound odd to those who are not from Jet, but oftentimes we will play a game with the bride and groom on their wedding day. Therefore, I would love for Cliff and Taryn to please approach the chairs sitting back to back. The scrape of chairs and tables preceded the murmurs throughout the hall as people leaned forward to locate the two chairs sitting in the middle of the dance floor. Cliff and Taryn approached cautiously, both looking at Genevieve with confused smiles. Each of you take a chair, please, Genevieve said as she dropped to the floor, not noticing Finn as he half stood from his chair with a wince. And please remove your shoes. Taryn froze as if thinking she'd misheard. Cliff, on the other hand, sat bolt upright. Excuse me. Hiccup exhaled a breath, sharing an amused look with Astrid. She looked like she was barely restraining an eye roll. Many laughs and groans echoed through the hall. Taryn twisted in her seat. Are you sure this is the right time? Cliff turned in his seat as well. Surely thou art indeed my soulmate. Scoffs and sighs quickly turned into shouts of indignation, particularly from Finn. He looked outraged. Adriana was hiccuping with laughter while Eric gently patted her shoulder. They looked so happy that Hiccup was momentarily glad they'd been convinced to get a pair of babysitters for Darren for the night. Mainly, his grandmothers, Lara Larson and Lof Anderson. He'd been even more shocked when Lara had taken the other women under her wing and they'd formed a close bond. Genevieve's voice cut through the groans. Shoes, please. Taryn and Cliff quickly removed their shoes, both giggling to each other over the sides of their chairs. Soon her white flats and his black leather boots were in their hands. Now give each other one of your shoes. Okay. Genevieve pulled a folded piece of paper out of her pocket. Pockets on dresses were a brilliant idea, Hiccup thought, with a flourish. Basically, I will ask you a question and you must answer not with words, but by raising the person's shoe that best answers the question. Be honest. Honesty is my specialty. Cliff said, sitting forward in his chair with an eager expression, shoes aloft. Genevieve snorted and shook her head. Question 1, who made the first move. Taryn and Cliff both grinned and lifted his boot in the air. A tar boy, Cliffy. Thorin cheered from a nearby pillar, a drink in his hand. A smattering of laughter echoed through the hall. Yas. Cliff twisted in his seat toward Taryn. I think I'm winning. You can't win this sort of game unless you don't know the answers. Question 2, who is cleaner? Taryn had flung her shoe high into the air to a chorus of laughter. Cliff winced, indecisive, and then stubbornly raised his boot. She turned and then gasped. That is so not true. Put that down. You're a stress cleaner. Cliff said indignantly. That's not the same thing. You're always throwing food everywhere. Tripping over the rug and spilling snackages is not the same thing. Oh boy, first fight. Snotlout said into his mug with a snort. Question 3, Genevieve said over the laughter and bickering. Who first said I love you? Grinning, both of them raised Taryn's shoe without pause. A chorus of us echoed through the room. On and on the questions went, many eliciting laughs from the crowd, especially when the couple would pause or playfully bicker about the correct answer. Cliff absolutely blushed when Genevieve dared to ask, who is the better kisser? You, who the Great Hall said. Taryn pursed her lips, fighting a smile. Cliff shook his head. He knew better than to lose man points by answering such a question. Slowly Taryn raised her own shoe. Noticing the rising laughter of the crowd, Cliff whipped around. Hey! She quickly lowered her shoe and her face into her knees, blushing brightly for all to see. Who has a better fashion sense? Taryn raised her shoe high but Cliff resolutely lifted his boot. She shook her head with a scoff. Those purple pants with yellow suspenders, Cliff. That was my choice on April Fool's Day, but Eric has dressed me for every big occasion for the last 5 years. I'd say I have better fashion sense. You leave me out of this. Eric said distantly. I think we all know the answer to this question, Genevieve said with a grin. Who talks more? Cliff's boots rose high into the air. Who takes more time in the washroom? Taryn's white slippers rose next. Who's the pickier eater? Taryn's shoes began to fall to their sides and then went straight back up again. Who has better hair? Taryn lifted Cliff's boot just as Cliff raised Taryn's white shoe. The crowd OD and they each turned in surprise to see how they'd responded. Or, babe. Cliff said. You're so cute. Or baby, you're cuter. Snotlout gagged obnoxiously into his mug. Tough Nut promptly shoved him off the bench. Be silent, you impetuous fool. You who do not understand true love and all its matchlessness. Tough Nut. You're causing a scene. Indeed. Tease the way I roll, Hixie. Hiccup sighed, ignoring the way fish legs choked on his mead. What did I tell you about calling me Hixie? Hey, it all started when you showed up to work with a hickey on your neck when we were 18. I don't know who blushed more, you or your father. Who knew that even the mighty stoic the vast could blush? Yes, thank you, Tough Nut, now that you've informed the entire Great Hall. Oh, don't be such a baby, Astrid said, elbowing him in the ribs. Genevieve's still reading questions. It was true. After a dozen or so more questions, Genevieve finally threw up her hands. That's all I've got. Thank you for being gracious and playing, Cliff and Taryn. I hope you both enjoyed it. Cliff and Taryn put their shoes back on and then stood as the Great Hall clapped. Genevieve raised her hands once more and Hiccup noted how quickly everyone stopped to listen. She'd make a fine chieftain's wife someday. One last thing, though it will be no small affair. I brought with me an entourage of instrumentalists and performers for this happy day. I encourage anyone willing to try to join us. Cliff and Taryn, I wish you both the best, and I hope you enjoy the music. Finn was quicker on his feet this time as Genevieve turned to jump down. She blinked in surprise at his upheld hand. She took it with a smile and allowed him to help her down. No sooner had her feet touched the ground than a few sounds plucked through the din. Hiccup turned in time to see a group of men and women with instruments sitting nearby, plucking instruments or adjusting their positions. Thuggery had what appeared to be a drum and mallet in his hands. Genevieve's best friend Hannah had a small black pipe in her hands, likely a penny whistle. Asterisk, they met each other's eyes and then started a countdown, Then a pair of girls began shaking round wooden items in time with thuggerous drum beats. The wooden instruments, whatever they were, created a shaking noise that filled the air with sound. The music was quiet at first, but then the beat began to pick up as the volume rose. A pair of men raised a rebec each and a bouncing jig exploded into sound. "Ah, I love this one," Kiev said to Molly, taking her hand and pulling her into the middle of the dance floor. Genevieve grabbed a young man's hand and led him into a dance that matched her parents'. Hiccup's surprise was quickly extinguished when he realized the boy was her brother, Callan. Finn was watching from a nearby bench beside Helga, a smile on his face. The other Jatan guests soon joined in the dancing. A boy who looked vaguely familiar walked to Helga and offered his hand, silently asking her to dance. He looked familiar to Hiccup, but he couldn't place his name. Helga raised a brow, nonplussed, while Finn scowled. With a long sigh, Helga dropped her hand into the boy's and shot Finn an amused "let's see how long I can stand this oaf" sort of look. The music carried throughout the hall, filling the empty space with sound and light. Hiccup found himself tapping his foot in time with the beat. Strange, he was as musically inept as they came, but the music and dance were fairly entertaining. Cliff and Taryn were following Genevieve and Callan's movements with surprising ease, which made him wonder if they'd learned some of the dances before the wedding. The song ended rather quickly, apparently short in its creation. It was only a few seconds before the instrumentalists struck up another jig, this one even more lively than the first. Conversation faded into the background as Genevieve and Callan pulled the group into two large circles and began to lead the people into a strange sort of looping march. Soon people were bumping into each other and cackling with laughter, even him and Astrid. Everyone seemed to be getting the hang of it though, with each pass, raising their arms so the lines of people could pass beneath and continue the march. Suddenly Genevieve was at their side and hauling them to their feet. Astrid dug in her heels, blushing madly, and Hiccup was keen to agree. But Genevieve grabbed them each with a surprisingly strong hand and dragged them into the circle. No wonder she'd snagged their son so thoroughly. She could be firm when she wanted to be. Hiccup felt distinctly awkward at first, unsure exactly why he was being strong-armed into this situation. But he soon found that everyone was either laughing, too occupied to notice his awkwardness, or too distracted with their own awkwardness to notice that he too felt awkward. Plus he really hated to step on anyone's toes, especially with his prosthetic, so he focused on following the steps as the person in front of him. The man was a burly Jatan, so Hiccup nearly lost his remaining 5 toes a few times, but he soon caught the hang of the steps. Before he knew it, he was laughing. He'd lost Astrid somewhere in the mix and hoped she was also enjoying herself. Perhaps Genevieve had been right to force them to join. It might seem awkward at first, but this was great. He lost track of time, laughing with random strangers until the song ended minutes or hours later. The crowd clapped and cheered for Thuggery and the other instrumentalists, who bowed, sweaty but pleased. He caught sight of Astrid through the crowd and pushed his way to her. She was flushed with color, her blue eyes sparkling in the golden light. Suddenly he was reminded of their own wedding day, though there hadn't been dancing. But as their eyes met, she never looked less fearless as she did then. "That was unexpectedly fun," Astrid said, pushing her hair back from her face. She'd worn it in half a braid today, the rest of her hair cascading down her shoulders like a golden waterfall. Even today she was still painfully beautiful. "Hey," Burke to Hiccup. He blinked. "Sorry." "Yeah, that was fun." He glanced around when the crowd began to hush from some announcement he'd heard. People began to take their seats, flushed from the heat. One of the guards on duty had shoved open the massive doors to allow in a cool breeze. Hiccup took Astrid's hand and pulled them onto the nearest bench. Most of everyone seemed to be taking their seats, but Callan and Genevieve stood in the center of the dance floor. Cliff and Taryn were sitting nearby, watching with expectantly confused faces. Callan's voice rose above the din. "Cliff and Taryn, congratulations on your wedding today. I wish you both the happiest of lives together. Genevieve and I prepared a song for you, and as such we taught many of your friends the dance that goes with it. So please join us." He nodded at the instrumentalists who launched into playing. ****, this is an interesting little jig," Molly said nearby. Astrid's brows raised. "You've never heard this before?" "No." Callan held his arms behind his back with a grin as he began the lyrics. I've been keeping secrets from you, dear. There's things of me are scared and you're my fear. The crack goes in the ground. Genevieve took up the melody. Hiccup smiled, remembering hearing the sound of her voice that first time. Astrid's eyes flew wide and he chuckled. And you've been coming closer to the edge. Wonder what goes on in my head. And so I shut you out. Callan reached out a hand to Genevieve and she took it with a grin. They bowed to each other and then launched into a two-step movement, their hands held aloft between them. And I guess that we don't need to be falling apart. But you will always have a special place in my heart. I never wanted this to end. Can you forgive me, friend? As the music exploded into an excited, happy tune, the Sullivans crossed each other's opposite wrist and leapt into a skipping jump that matched both the excitement and beat of the music. Taryn had her hands over her mouth in shock. Cliff was absolutely grinning with delight. "'Cause I fell in the hole. In the hole, in the hole. My heart was turning cold. Turning cold, turning cold. I never wanted this to end. Can you forgive me, friend?" Genevieve and Callan performed another series of movements with their hands held aloft. But soon Callan twirled her away and they bowed to each other as if in parting. Others had joined the dance floor, many Jatans and even a few of Cliff and Taryn's friends, such as Eric and Adriana, Kylan and a boy Hiccup didn't know, as well as Morgan and Evan. A lovely woman with red hair took Callan's hand to continue the dance as the music picked up again. But to the entire crowd's surprise, Finn had also taken up a position on the dance floor and held out his hand to Genevieve with a smirk. "Wait?" Snotlout demanded. "Since when?" "I have no idea," Hiccup said with a laugh as the dance took over again. "And I promised you that we would never change. Say you and me would always stay the same. How I let you down. And I guess that we don't need to be falling apart. But you will always have a special place in my heart. I never wanted this to end. Can you forgive me, friend?" When the now massive group of dancers launched into the dance as the music took over, it was quite a sight. It was organized and efficient so nobody ran into each other. It occurred to Hiccup then that this sort of thing must require a lot of planning and practice. How long had they been planning this? Genevieve and Callan as well as the other Jatans kept up the lyrics to the song, which likely only made the dancing more difficult. And yet as always, the Jatans were masters of music. "'Cause I fell in the hole. In the hole, in the hole. My heart was turning cold. Turning cold, turning cold. I never wanted this to end. Can you forgive me, friend?" "Hey!" Hiccup glanced over at the instrumentalists as they took over, allowing everyone to dance without singing for a bit. Thuggery and the others were sweating but grinning as if having the time of their lives. And he realized that Burke had really missed out in the past few decades when music had sort of fallen by the wayside compared to other things. Well, they'd have to change that. The instruments quieted as Genevieve and Callan returned with the lyrics. The couples had ceased dancing, or rather, each now had slowed into a small spin of sorts, one set of hands still holding each other close while the other clasped around their partner's back. Callan was singing and gazing down at his wife with an enraptured look, as if she was the foundation for everything. Finn and Genevieve looked no different. Eric must have learned the lyrics because he seemed to be singing to Adriana, whose eyes were glistening with joy. And Hiccup didn't know when it had happened, but Cliff and Taryn had also joined in the dance. Cliff bent to kiss Taryn and it was perhaps the sweetest thing Hiccup had seen thus far tonight. "So can you forgive me, friend? Can you forgive me, friend? For breaking us apart? 'Cause in the end, I didn't want this to end. Can you forgive me, friend? Forgive my ugly heart." The music and lyrics returned into double the volume, nearly making Hiccup jump. Everyone launched back into the dance once more, but this time they were joined by clapping from the crowd in time to the beat of the music. "And I guess that we don't need to be falling apart. But you will always have a special place in my heart. I never wanted this to end. Can you forgive me, friend?" The chorus repeated, but with the doubled volume, it was also double the excitement, and apparently double the show. Callan and his wife, Finn and Genevieve and a few other couples took running leaps atop some of the tables and continued the dance from there. Snotlout looked affronted and snatched his and Heather's drinks off the table as he glared up at Genevieve and Finn, but they hardly noticed. Hiccup and Astrid cackled with glee. "'Cause I fell in the hole. In the hole, in the hole. My heart was turning cold. Turning cold, turning cold. I never wanted this to end. Can you forgive me, friend? Hey." While the instruments played another few rounds of the tune, Genevieve twined her arms around Finn's neck as they spun. He kept his hands firmly locked around her waist as she threw back her head with a fearless grin. They both looked so happy in that moment that Hiccup felt intensely thankful that his son had found someone so special, that helped him to grow into a better person. Also, who was this fearless Finn who now danced atop tables without caring what other people thought? The instruments stopped with a final flourish. The great hall exploded into cheers, nearly everyone rising to their feet to join in clapping and shouting. Callan and his wife bowed and then straightened. He raised a hand to Genevieve and Finn, both of whom bowed. Now Finn was blushing, as if now remembering that this had been a public event. He pointed at Cliff and mouthed, "I did this for you." The cheering and clapping continued for endless minutes. Cliff and Taryn finally cut through the crowd, faces split with grins until they approached Genevieve and Finn as they finally returned to the floor. Taryn threw her arms around Genevieve's neck. "Oh, that was beautiful. Thank you. Oh, and Callan, you as well." Callan laughed good-naturedly as Cliff yanked him into a bone-crushing hug. "It was our pleasure. We'll never forget this for the rest of our lives," Cliff said. "Thank you. And who knew?" Taryn said, turning to Finn with a grin. "He cleans up nice and dances." Finn gave a lazy shrug. "Only for special occasions. Too much and I might spontaneously combust." "Aha!" Genevieve said, patting his arm. She lifted her hair off her neck and waved at her face. The air in here had turned stifling. "I wonder where Eric and Adriana are." "They were here a minute ago," Hiccup said, glancing around. "Maybe they went to get drinks." Finn muttered something low enough that Hiccup didn't catch it, but Genevieve promptly slapped his arm. Hiccup decided he didn't want to know or think about it too hard. They were probably around here somewhere. Maybe they'd just stepped out to get some air because it was very warm in here. Toothless pushed his nose through the group of people and rested his face on the table. "Well, hi there," Hiccup said. "Where have you been?" Toothless promptly belched, which smelled like a horrible mixture of fish and wine. His pupils were oddly dilated. Hiccup sighed. "You know, I'm going to have words with Gobber regarding his wine. I don't know why you have to get into it at every wedding." "It's a celebration, Dad," Finn said, raising a glass. "Toothless wants to celebrate too. It's the sleeping it off for 3 days after that's a problem." Astrid scoffed. "You could do with a little more walking." Finn gagged on his drink and turned away, spluttering. "What are you saying?" Hiccup demanded, whirling to her. He glanced down at Toothless, who'd fallen asleep standing up with his face still on the table. "Are you calling me fat?" "Not fat," Astrid said delicately. "Just that middle-age pudge. It happens to us all, you know." "What, I'm not, excuse me." Genevieve seemed to be fighting a smile and took Finn's hand. "Let's get some air, fearless Finn." Finn hummed in an interested sort of way. "I do love it when you call me by my full name." "Your wedding day is coming, children," Astrid called after them. Hiccup snorted. "Eventually. It'll be here before we know it." "Yeah, but can you imagine being forced to wait that long? I wasn't planning to retire for at least a few more years." "He's only 18. "Yes. But he could do it. We could bump that retirement up and finally go on that vacation we've talked about for 40 years. "Ha! What's a vacation?" "I rest my case," Astrid said, lacing her fingers through his. "Really though, he could do it." "He could," Hiccup sighed. "But I don't want to rush him into becoming chief just so he can get married. That's a lot of pressure and we all know what happens when Finn bites off more than he can chew." So talk to Kiev. I have and they're not budging. Something about proper ceremonial rites and such. I don't get it. Astrid rolled her eyes. It's all this that I love about Jut, she said, gesturing toward the dance floor and the musicians, a few of which were still strumming lightly, which added to the atmosphere as Cliff and Taryn made their way through the crowd of guests to thank them for coming. But all the traditionalism is just, it's a lot. Hey, we thought it would be longer for some things to change, like allowing their women to train and fly dragons. Now look at them. Yes, but forcing a pair of young kids to wait to get married for years. I know, Astrid. I mean Finn is no stranger to passion. Hiccup choked on his mead. Do we really think it's wise to make them wait? You don't think they're? I don't think so. I think they're trying their best to control themselves, to do it right. Finn has grown a lot as a person and he respects Kiev. He wants to do the right thing. Ever since he returned from Mayro and things turned around, he's always wanted to do right by the girl he'd end up with. Astrid sighed through her nose. I'm just not sure that making them wait is wise. It's playing with fire. Even a little kindling can cause a roaring fire. Indeed. Hiccup could remember plenty of times for them as young, nearly 20-year-olds, how passion would mix with desire. One thing could easily lead to another. This was exactly how he and Astrid had gotten pregnant so quickly after they'd gotten married. All that pent-up resistance and passion, and, well. He didn't think Finn and Genevieve had crossed that line yet, but Astrid had a point. If they had to wait for years. But he still held true to his original point. He did not want to retire just for the sake of Finn being allowed to get married. He knew Finn would make a great chief and that day was approaching fast, but not yet. He didn't want to rush it. He wanted to do it right. He wanted it to happen when Finn was ready, and right now, it was close, but they weren't quite there yet. Astrid took a deep breath through her nose and let it out. I'm sure it will work out how it's supposed to. It just concerns me a little bit. This is supposed to be a union of two people. One side shouldn't make it unfair by calling all the shots based on silly traditions, that's all I'm saying. Hiccup nodded. I agree. I could talk to Kiev again, but I don't want to strain anything. It's only more awkward because we're both chieftains. He shouldn't force you to retire just so our kids can get married, Hiccup. Maybe all 6 of us should sit down and discuss it, and come up with a compromise. Something that won't require you to retire but won't require them to wait until then. You're still relatively young for a chieftain and you're not quite senile yet. Thank you for that note of confidence. My point is, Astrid continued. What are we going to do? Make them wait until they're nearly 30. Her baby-making window is only so short. Astrid. What? Astrid demanded. I want more grandbabies. Hiccup sighed heavily but couldn't quite fight the grin. Finn, a father. It was almost too mind-blowing to consider and yet he could see it. In a few years. A few long years. And curly-haired babies to boot. Laughing, Hiccup slipped a hand around her waist and kissed her cheek. I wouldn't let them hear you say all this. Probably give our poor son a mild heart attack. Probably. Astrid said, smiling at a fixed point in the crowd. Her smile slowly fell. I just want him to be happy. He is happy. He's never been happier. We don't need to put things on hold but we don't need to rush things either. Hiccup brushed his fingers through her hair. Even after all these years it was still soft like silk. It will work out. Trust me. Does this mean you'll talk to Kiev? Hiccup nodded. I have an idea. A compromise. Oh. 20. Hiccup said, meeting her eyes. Let them get married after he turns 20. But the twins' 19th birthday is still a few months away. Astrid faced him, her expression incredulous. That's 2 years, Hiccup. Do you have a better idea? Astrid's lips were pursed as she thought. The moment stretched on for nearly a minute before she exhaled. No. I don't think it's an issue of trust for Finn, Hiccup said. But if they want time to go through whatever ceremonial bullcrap. Astrid. Hiccup hissed, though it wasn't very reprimanding due to the laugh that came out of his mouth. Rude. But yes, 2 years and a few months should be plenty of time for them to get through whatever it is they want to. It's 2 more years for Finn to get a handle on becoming chief. But that won't be the reason they get married. If I'm still able, I'll continue to be chief after the 2 years are up. I suppose we can cross that particular bridge when we come to it. But 2 years is nothing compared to whatever it could be. Astrid sighed heavily. Then she nodded. 2 years. Let's talk to everyone tomorrow. Well, let's talk to Finn and Genevieve first. I don't want to spring this on them and make any arrangements with Kiev and Molly until they know about it first. It is their wedding after all. Their future. Nodding, Astrid squeezed his hand. You're a great father, you know that. And you're a better mother. Astrid pressed a kiss to his mouth. He traced her jaw with his fingers and smiled softly. A huffling snore cut through their moment of silence and they withdrew, Astrid glaring down at Toothless still asleep between them. We really do need to do something about Gobbus Mead every wedding. Yeah. But not now. For now, Hiccup was content to sit and watch the revelry. Genevieve was sitting in Finn's lap across the room. Long strands of her curly hair were twirled around his fingers as they talked with Morgan and Evan, who were also recently engaged. Cliff and Taryn were ensconced in a circle of friends, all of whom were sharing hugs with the bride and cooing at her ring. Cliff set a hand on his hip and stuck out his hand too, wiggling his ring finger. Be bedazzled, my friends. Cliff said loudly, allowing Hiccup to hear. The group launched into cackles even as Taryn rolled her eyes at her new husband. That only left one last pair that made Hiccup's heart sing, but he couldn't seem to find them anywhere. Have you seen Addie and Eric? Astrid scanned the crowd. No, actually, I haven't seen them since the dance ended. Huh. I'm sure they're around here somewhere. Probably. The door banged open hard enough to shut on its own. Eric's mouth was hot and fast on Adriana's as they stumbled in the dark. She bumped into the corner of a table, which scraped against the floor. Eric pulled her into him until they were flush against the wall with no space between them. She could feel the rise and fall of his chest against hers, feel the rapid pounding of his heart beneath his shirt, his skin, pounding just as hard as her own. His lips tore from hers and mouthed across her jaw, down her neck, to the swell of her breasts of the strapless dress. Adriana panted, her hands sliding through his hair. He returned to her mouth as he took up handfuls of her dress until his hands, hot and firm, found her legs. She gasped into his mouth and threw her arms around his shoulders as he hefted her up, pulling her legs around his hips so every inch of them was pressed together. Adriana's head was buzzing, every inch of her skin felt on fire, and yet it wasn't enough. Gods, you drive me wild. Eric said against the skin of her throat. From the second I saw you in this dress I wanted you. I've been thinking about you, about this all day. He pressed her deeper into the wall and she bit back a whimper. The sensation of him pressed into her, of his hands on her legs, of the new strength in his upper body from training, it was all enough to make her combust. So what are you waiting for? She gasped, kissing him firmly. The sound of their lips as she pulled away was loud in the silence of the empty barn. It wasn't an ideal location and she was quite sure that the owner of the barn wouldn't appreciate it, but, well, what they didn't know wouldn't kill them, right? Eric's eyes, so bright in their blue-green color, seemed to glow in the darkness. I've never. He swallowed. I mean, we've never, not away from home, and I've never been this wild. Adriana asked in a laugh. He breathed a laugh, gentling his kisses. He seemed relieved that she'd voiced the word. Yes. Because that's what you do to me, you know. But I don't want to. Don't stop. Adriana said, flexing her fingers into the curve of his shoulder. I like it when you surprise me. Please. The word seemed to make him pause. They'd been married for more than a year and well mapped each other out with long nights and early mornings, but this was different. Maybe it was the fact they weren't at home, or there was that hungry look in his eyes that he so rarely showed, or the fact he'd been staring at her all day, but she wanted more. Please what? Eric murmured, sliding a hand around her leg to keep her in place. What do you want? Adriana's breath was tight in her chest. This was so strange, for him to tease her like this, but it was enough to drive her crazy. Trusting his strength, she cupped his face with her hands. Today you called me a fallen star, and I said I'd gladly burn with you. And the look you gave me was a promise. His pulse was fluttering wildly under her hands and she leaned closer, her breath against his ear. So make me burn. The words were his undoing. He wrapped an arm around her waist and set her on a nearby table. Her breath hitched into her throat as he laid her back with a hand and pulled off her shoes and undergarments. As if as an afterthought he strode to the door and bolted it. Adriana breathed a laugh, but it was short because he was suddenly on her. His mouth was still hot on her skin. For a brief moment she wished they were at home so he could strip her bare and place his mouth on her everywhere, but a tiny voice in her head said even with a locked barn door that wouldn't be wise. There were dangerous things in barns, like nails and tools and weapons, and all thoughts choked off in her mind as Eric grabbed her by the legs and pulled her toward him. He leaned over her and met her eyes. Suddenly she became hyper-aware of every sound, every sensation. The flecks of green in his lovely blue eyes that made them the color sea foam. For a second, his expression softened, just as it always did. As if he couldn't believe his luck. She hoped he'd never stop looking at her like that. It was dark in the barn, just light enough from a ray of moonlight spilling in through a nearby window. The darkness heightened every sensation and sound. Eric was breathing hard, even as she urged him onward. This was only a part of their relationship now, but certainly one of the most important. This savage push and pull that bonded their souls into one. It had been a similar situation that had ultimately brought them together, but in far less amorous context. There had been no love there in that barn. But this. There was nothing but love in Eric's eyes as he made love to her, and she to him. There was nothing that could break them in this cruel yet beautiful world. After years of so much loss and darkness, they'd found each other after such unspeakable pain. When they'd first been married, they'd mutually agreed to never make love outside of their own home. They weren't that sort of couple. Secretly Adriana had never wanted to do that in any place that reminded her of the worst day of her life. And yet now, her heart and soul had healed so much that even that mattered very little. It wasn't about the place, it was the person. It was only Eric. He was breathing hard into the crook of her neck. You drive me insane. I love you, Annie, I love you. I know, Adriana said, pulling his face up to kiss him. I know. She thought of Darren suddenly, how beautiful it would be to give him a little brother or sister. The thought brought a smile to her face and he gave her a quizzical look. What? She shook her head. Nothing. No, what? I want to have another baby. Eric smiled and kissed her. I know you do. I want to have your baby. Oh, I know you do. Casual as he might try to sound, she could see just how the words affected him. How much he wanted that dream to be fulfilled, more than perhaps anything. How speaking those dreams aloud in their most intimate, vulnerable moments together branded it onto each other's skin, making it permanent, not just a dream but a goal. He kissed her firmly as if sealing that promise. She thought surely her heart must explode from simply loving and being loved by another person. Her heart, it turned out, did not combust. But oh, did it burn. It burned brightly until they were both spent, like a pair of fallen stars. And even as they returned home some time later, disheveled and grinning and blushing like a pair of 16-year-olds sneaking out at night, their hearts glowed with the memory of that promise. Cliff didn't know what time it was when he and Taryn made it to their little house. The tiny house had seen many of Cliff's adventures. From moving in with Eric as his first living space away from his parents, to being Eric and Adriana's first home while he lived at the Haddocks, to becoming his first bachelor pad once they'd moved into their new house. There were scuff marks on the threshold from all the boots that had trod over it. There was a large burn mark on the floor by the stone oven from the time he'd tried to make biscuits and nearly burned the place down. There was a crack in the west window from the time he and Finn had gotten in a mock fist fight. It had escalated, both of them cackling, until the sound of splintering glass had sent Eric into the living room with his arms crossed. A dad pose if Cliff had ever seen one. So many memories in this tiny house. And now it wasn't just his. It was his and Taryn's. Despite his exhaustion, his heart leaped in his chest at the thought. He closed the door behind them and Taryn slumped into the nearest chair, her favorite pink chair he recalled with a smile, and took off her shoes. I am exhausted. Me too. Cliff said. Do you want tea or anything? No, I'm all right. Thanks though. Taryn smiled up at him tiredly. Cliff smiled back and dropped into the nearest seat on the couch. They'd acquired a new couch with plushy pillows, gifted to her by Morgan. Each had hand-sewn flowers and pine trees and little swirls that resembled the wind. The largest of them had an embroidered C and T on them. This one was his favorite. Well, we made it. Cliff said. Now what? Taryn snorted and pulled herself out of her chair. Now I'm going to change out of this dress. Cliff laughed softly. Okay. He wasn't sure exactly what was on the itinerary. That thought sent a blush rising up his neck and he rubbed it fiercely as Taryn disappeared down the hall. That was not what he'd meant to think. Itinerary indeed. He meant, of course, how they were supposed to proceed. Perhaps they should have discussed this prior to now. Just so they had a little bit of an idea of how this was going to go. Were they going to just brush their teeth and go to sleep? Or? Groaning to himself, Cliff shoved his hands into his hair and dropped his head back onto the couch. Sighing, he forced himself to quit overthinking. It's only awkward if you make it awkward, that was his motto. This was no different. Even if this was his first night with Taryn, his new wife, which would surely come with a few awkward moments. So Cliff. Taryn's voice echoed down the hall. Yeah. I got something for you. Well, Taryn paused. He glanced down the hall but he couldn't see her in the dim candle-lit room. Technically it's for me but for you to enjoy. Oh gods. Cliff swallowed hard. Okay. So I want you to close your eyes and I'm going to come out. Are you sure? Yes. There was no doubt in her voice, only a small trace of something. Excitement maybe. Cliff briefly sent up a prayer. Maybe they hadn't discussed this before getting married but boy, maybe she was more eager than he'd realized. That was okay, of course, but it was doing something to his heart. With a quiet exhale, Cliff closed his eyes and said, okay. Your eyes are closed. Yup. No peeking. Okay. Soft footfalls sounded down the hall and curved around the couch as she approached. Cliff kept his eyes firmly shut, though he stiffened slightly when her fingers trailed through his hair as she passed. Gods help him. She stopped in front of him, which he could tell by sound alone. Then she said, okay, open them. Cliff wasn't sure what to expect in any way, shape or form. But as he opened his eyes, he didn't expect to burst out into laughter. Taryn's laughter joined him throughout the small house. Oh my gods. Cliff said, covering his face with his hand for a moment to rub his eyes and then dropping it again. What is that? Taryn was wearing what could only be described as a Dragon onesie. It was bright blue with a zipper going down the front and embroidered scales down the hips and arms. It had a hood which rose up around her face with horns and eyes attached at the top. She turned to give him a view of the back, which had raised ridges up the spine and, to his absolute delight, a tail. She faced him again, her face pinched with laughter. Do you like it? Like it? Cliff sat forward and pulled her closer. I love it. It's adorable. I have to say, this is probably a first as far as wedding nights go. Taryn giggled and then planted her hands on his shoulders before folding herself atop of him, knees on either side of his hips. She was quite literally in his lap now. To his surprise, the material of the onesie was soft under his hands as he wrapped them around her back. Well, I had no idea what to do about tonight, Taryn said, playing with his hair. Expectations and all that. And it was actually Adriana who told me not to let expectations dictate the night. Just to be ourselves and do what we want, not what is expected. She spoke honestly and with a small amount of delicacy, as if refusing to let the topic be awkward. He felt a strong rush of gratitude for her then. And then I was talking to Morgan, who was making little Dragon onesies like this for a child's play, and I immediately thought you would love this. So I asked if I paid her, if she could make me one. Well, I'll have to send her a thank you card. She said you'd say that, Taryn said with a grin. And she absolutely forbade it. She doesn't want to know what we got up to at all hours of the night. Cliff exhaled through lips heavily. Well, that's fair, I suppose. She did say however that she'd be willing to make you a Dragon 1 EC2 if you wish. Really? I would honestly. Next paycheck. Cliff leaned forward and kissed her, sliding his hands up her back, the ridges of the 1EC flicking between his fingers. Good thing it's soft too. Taryn bit her lip. I thought you'd like this over something frilly. Cliff blinked. Well, I mean, frilly is nice too. Though I dare say I don't know what my tastes are yet. You'll have to give me a show with all your lady things. Taryn gasped and stared at him, choking on a laugh. Cliff smedley. I had no idea you were so naughty. Hey, I can keep a lid on these things until the right time. We are married now, after all. I'll have to bear this in mind in the days to come. Sounds good to me. But hey, the same goes for me. If you want me to strut up and down the halls of our tiny house brandishing everything from my undie drawer, I can. I don't see why this has to be a singularly female thing to do. Taryn buried her face into the space between his neck and shoulder, giggling madly. You are so ridiculous. I mean, it's a valid point. Taryn raised her face and kissed him, slowly at first and then deepening it as she pushed her hands into his hair. Cliff pulled her closer, relishing every bit of her. The rose-water smell of her hair, the taste of her lip gloss which she'd taken to reapplying throughout the day, the softness of her ridiculous yet amazing Dragon 1 EC beneath his hands. The thought sent a thrill through his chest and he grinned suddenly. What? Taryn asked, breathing harder than before. Cliff shook his head, nuzzling her nose with his. I love you. Taryn's expression was soft and tender. I love you more. And so began the first day of their new adventure, Cliff thought. He'd never thought of himself as much of a writer before. A storyteller, for sure. He could see it though. Writing down a tale of a sappy lovey-dovey couple who had adventures. The boy would have bushy curly hair that weighed more than his lanky frame and the girl would wear a Dragon 1 EC as they sailed a ship into the sunset. It was perhaps the dorkiest thing he'd ever thought. But he didn't mind and neither did she.